Don Revie, his biggest rival, had moved from the newly crowned league champions Leeds United to become England manager. While Peter Taylor decided to stay on at Brighton, Clough answered the call from Elland Road. And so began one of football's most bizarre managerial tenures.
Everybody at the club was totally shocked when they heard the name Brian Clough, because if you'd have asked anybody probably in the whole country, one person Leeds wouldn't have gone for would have been Brian at the time.
It was a marriage made in hell, really. I mean, Clough should never. I mean, it was an unbelievable decision.
Clough had always reserved particular contempt for Leeds.
We've got to be very careful of the type of things I say, but, you know, football had a bad week last week. The goodies lost and the cheats won.
His constant berating of their manager and their tough style of play did not endear him to many Yorkshiremen.
You see, the problem was with Revie and with Clough. I mean, they were so far apart in their lines of thinking. You know, they hated each other's guts. They were always at each other's throats.
The last 4 or 5 years, we've been the most entertaining side by crowd entertainment and topping charts with national newspapers and television.
Also, Don, the disciplinary chart.
The disciplinary chart...
You topped that.
No, that's not true. It wasn't 100% right, I will agree.
Sorry?
It wasn't 100% right, discipline.
The first thing he did was ask for all the furniture that Don had in his office to be taken away, because he wouldn't sit on the chair that he'd sat on, he wouldn't have a desk there that he'd had. And then we realised that he really did hate Don and the setup at Leeds.
We were 2 or 3 days training and we didn't see him, you know. And then we didn't know what was happening. We wanted somebody to give us some guidance as to what to do. And then about 3 or 4 days later, we had this team meeting.
And he said, right, he said, you might have wondered why I haven't said a lot. He said, I wanted to make my own impressions of the club. I wanted to see things without anybody talking to me and telling me this and that, which sounded reasonable. And then his next words were, but before I start working with you lot, called us a lot, there's something I've got to tell you what I think about you all. And then he launched into a personal attack on every player.
I said, we'll have to cut this harassing of referees out, because they perfected it, Leeds did. Anytime there was a free kick given against Leeds, you could never see the referee for white shirts round him, shoving him, barging him, all sorts. They perfected it, and it was cheating.
His finishing gambit was, and finally, you've won all the trophies, all the domestic trophies, you've won European competitions, but as far as I'm concerned, you can throw all your medals in the bin because you never won one of them fairly.
You know, because she cheated for those, you know, and that's not a thing to say to probably 15, 16 internationals.
Clough's first game in charge was the 1974 Charity Shield. While Don Revie looked on, the Leeds players made it clear that they intended to stick to tried and trusted methods. Without the support of his old partner, Clough cut an increasingly isolated figure at Leeds.
If Taylor wasn't going with him, then he shouldn't have gone to Leeds, because he would tell Brian the one to watch out for. Don't trust that one, not sure about him, he's all right, and I'll work him out in this time tomorrow.
Desperate for allies, Clough brought in some familiar faces from Derby. McGovern and O'Hare were followed by Duncan Mackenzie, who found he was expected to do more than score goals.
Well, Brian Clough, you see, asked me more or less to mark his card about what was going on behind the scenes with the players, what they were saying about him. I mean, I can understand that. That's clever play, isn't it, for him to ask me. But I did turn around and say to him, I said, no, I said, you got the wrong one. I said, you know, I said, for starters, I said, they've said nothing untoward about you. I didn't exactly tell him the truth, no. I mean, the players were obviously very anti-Brian Clough this time, very anti-Brian Clough.
The players at Leeds just didn't accept that he was a good manager. Couldn't see how he could be a good manager. And they used to say, well, was he like this at Derby? I said, yeah, he was just the same at Derby. And they must have been amazed how he actually won things at Derby or be so successful.
Seized on by Chua, away from Hunter. He's got Bell on his right. Bell coming in now. Beautiful goal!
6 games into the season and the champions had only won once. A crisis meeting was called between the players, Clough and chairman Sam Bolton. Clough was about to find himself on the wrong end of another players' revolt.
Now you can cut the atmosphere with a knife. And Sam Bolton started. He started off with Cloughie. And it was like, Mr. Clough, Mr. Clough, players don't take right kindly to thee. What's thou got to say for thyself, Mr. Clough? Now, you can't believe Cloughie would ever be without a word, but he wouldn't. He just shook his head. He couldn't believe he was involved in this. And he invited the players to comment.
We told them, you know, Brian doesn't like Leeds United, he doesn't like the players, and he's insulted everybody, but they'd appointed him, so it was up to them to make a decision. We never actually said we wanted Brian Clough out of the club at any time.
I can't sit here now and say, no, I didn't. I wanted him to leave because I didn't think he was good for the club.
I said, just give it a bit longer, it'll change. He said, well, have a little think about it. So I twigged then he'd made his mind up.
After that meeting, he was sacked.
After only 44 days, Clough was out of his job, and waiting for a showdown with him was his old enemy, Don Revie.
But why? Why did he come from Brighton to Leeds to take it over when you'd criticised them so much and said we should be in the second division for this and we should do this and we should do that? Why do you take the job?
No, because I thought it was the best job in the country.
Of course it was the best job.
I was taking over the league champions.
Yeah, you were taking over the league champion. You were taking over the best bunch of players that you've ever seen.
Well,
that you'll ever.
I didn't know about the players, Don. I wanted to do something you hadn't done. And I said, I want to win the league, but I want to win it better. Now, there is no other reply to that question.
No, but
because you had won the league.
Yeah, but there's no way you could win it better.
Why not?
No.
But that's the only hope I've got.
We'd only lost 4 matches. And
but I can only lose 3.
No.
I tried to do things too quickly, simple as that. But that was the way I was. If I wanted to do something, I did it. Right or wrong, I did it. I thought it was always right.
Why is he going, Mr. Cousins? I mean, there is no answer to that question.
Because we've been spoilt by Don Revie.
Seemingly this was Clough's nadir. A year previously he was a great football manager with a big head. Now he was only the latter. If ever Clough's cocky persona was knocked, it was in 1974. The top clubs were now no longer interested in a man who had failed at Brighton and Leeds.
I think his confidence certainly had been knocked a little bit by his experience at Leeds. You know, this guy who he felt that nobody could knock him down, and maybe a little bit self-doubt. You know, maybe he wasn't as good a manager as he thought he was.
I'd got a house in Leeds, I'd got a house in Brighton, and I got one in Derby. And I turned around to my missus one night in bed and I said, what am I? I said, am I a bloody Football League manager or a property developer? I said, I've got 3 houses and I'm out of work.
You'll get run over, lads, whatever you do.
But by January 1975, Clough was back in work and back in the second division with another struggling club, Nottingham Forest. What he was to achieve there would put all past triumphs and disasters in the shade.